Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Caroline Yang, the moderator for this panel session, Decarbonization, Stay Profitable. This session would not have been possible without the generous support of our sponsors who are gratefully acknowledged here. DNVGL, Norwegian Embassy, MBUS, and Flock, who has provided us with the comfortable chairs here. I understand that there is a function where you can type in your questions. Please do so, and I am sure our panelists will be happy to answer them. Before we begin the session proper, we are privileged to have Her Excellency Anita Norge, Norwegian Embassy in Singapore, to give her welcome address. Your Excellency, please.
Thank you, Caroline. It's a pleasure to be here at this very timely webinar on how the maritime industry can decarbonize and still stay profitable. More than 90% of all goods are transported by ships, and shipping represents 2.2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So we need the shipping industry to step up. The decision by IMO in 2018 to halve greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2050, echoing the Paris Agreement, was therefore hugely important, an important first step. Now it is the time for implementation of that plan. Only through concrete measures will the level of ambition be met within a globally harmonized regulatory framework. This is what is happening this week. Yesterday, the Marine Environment Protection Committee of the IMO decided on short-term measures to cut shipping's carbon footprint. These will require ships to combine a technical and an operational approach to reduce their carbon intensity in the short term. The shipping industry itself gave a clear message ahead of this week's talks. The targets can only be achieved with immediate acceleration of zero carbon fuels and technologies. To achieve this, the industry proposes an R&D decarbonization program of $5 billion under IMO to be financed through mandatory contributions of $2 per ton of marine fuel consumed. This fund would be managed by a non-governmental R&D organization, an International Maritime Research and Development Board. This is valuable input. Decarbonization has also become more important for other stakeholders, such as banks, investors, customers, and even end consumers. A number of NGOs have argued that the IMO decisions this week fall short of what is needed. We therefore need to pull together. Failure is not an option. Norway has set ambitious national climate targets, and so has our shipping industry. We agree on the urgent need for a substantial increase in R&D, and we have stepped up our own efforts. We launched a green shipping program a few years back, bringing together more than 60 different agencies, companies, and research institutions. The program aims to find scalable solutions for efficient and environmentally friendly shipping. The results will be cost-effective emission cuts, but also economic growth, increased competitiveness, and green jobs. The program focuses on piloting, more than 20 large pilot projects so far, thus bringing concrete projects to life, testing them, learning from them, and then continuing R&D. The Norwegian maritime industry, on its part, has an ambition to be in the lead on green solutions and recently agreed on an ambitious commitment to be climate neutral by 2050. The strategy requires shipping companies to cut their emissions by 50% by 2030. From 2030, ship owners will only order ships with a zero emission technology. This requires new technologies and sustainable solutions quickly. Only in this way may the industry achieve its ambitions. In this landscape, there are many opportunities for an even stronger collaboration between Norway and Singapore. We are like-minded and advanced and with similar targets when it comes to being in the lead technologically and with an emphasis on solving the climate crisis. We already collaborate in a number of ways. I've been told that there's no time to go into all the excellent examples we have, but let me just say this. We have a lot to build on, but also high ambitions for what we want to achieve in the years to come. I therefore look forward to the discussion. I'm sure our outstanding panelists will have valuable insights to share. Thank you, and back to you, Caroline.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. Now for an introduction of my panelists from left to right, I have Dr. Sharin Osman, Regional Manager, Maritime Advisory and Digital Innovation, Southeast Asia, Pacific and India, DNVGL. Henrik Danstrom, Country Manager, Kongsberg Maritime Singapore. Kenneth Lim, CTO at the Singapore Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. And Kenneth Lim will be appointed as the Assistant Chief Executive Industry of MPA from 1st January 2021. And last but not least, I have Eric Stromso, CEO, Pareto Securities. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today and being part of this session. Let's go straight to the point. As we heard from Anita Norgard, the ambassador of Norwegian Embassy, the maritime shipping community has a goal to reach set by the IMO of reduction of GHG emissions by 50% in 2050 compared to 2008. I will start with Dr. Sharin from DNVGL. Perhaps you can give a short summary of the DNVGL report that just came out, the Maritime Forecast to 2050. Dr. Sharin.
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Caroline.
Yeah.
Yes, the Maritime Forecast 2050 is part of our annual report publication. We call it the Energy Transition Outlook, or ETO, and this is the 4th edition of the report. The aim of our report is actually to enhance our ship owners' ability to navigate between the technological, regulatory, as well as the market uncertainty due to decarbonization. So the report aims to really assist them to remain competitive, to maintain their profitability, as well as to future-proof the asset. And for this year, we have made it slightly different, that we incorporate what we call it a scenario-based framework to assess the future ship design. And to do that, we use 3 distinct decarbonization pathways. First one is there's no ambition. That means there's no additional new policy to be implemented by IMO. The second pathway is the IMO 2050 ambition. And the third, that is a lot more ambitious, we call it decarbonization by 2040. That is, if other stakeholders such as the charterers, the financiers, the investors, or the end consumer put pressure on IMO to establish a lot more ambitious target by 2040. And of course, then to do this and to look at the next 30 years, we need to manage with a lot of uncertainty. And I can share that the 3 key uncertainties. One is about the regulatory policy measures, what we expect to get in the next 3 decades. Secondly is about the fuel and energy price development. And the third is about the sea trade demand within the next decades. As well, we know a lot of these issues with regards to the trade between some of the superpowers. So with this scenario, we come up with 30 different scenarios. And then we develop a model to support our scenario building in terms of coming out what are the possibilities. But what I can share is 3 key highlights, coming out from the report. I think number one is that shipping, definitely we need to generate new generation of carbon neutral fuel. I think that is without doubt. I think that that has to be the case. Secondly, is then that is if ship owners needs to invest on their asset now, then they should look at investing in dual fuel LNG, because that would ensure that they have the fuel flexibility. And then you may ask what type of fuels that we foresee in the future. So we see then that ammonia and methanol are promising fuels, but also other fuels could be transitional drop-in fuels such as bio-LNG. So this is something that I tried to summarize, Caroline, a 100-page report within less than 5 minutes. So I hope that helps to set the theme for our discussion today.
Thank you, Dr. Sharin. That's a very concise summary. Appreciate that. Yeah. So following from this report and to our theme of how do companies stay profitable and relevant in their journey to decarbonization, say in the next 10 years. So we know currently there are no clear pathways to alternative fuels, as we can hear from your report that there are many fuels that are being tested right now. What kind of integration of technologies, fuels, and operational processes within vessel and the industry as a whole are needed to meet the decarbonization vision? Perhaps I can start with Henrik.
Sure. Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah.
Actually, in Kongsberg Maritime, we believe that this ambition of 60% reduction by 2050 is not enough. It actually means about 70% reduction in order to do, because there will be more vessels on the seas. And if you compare the absolute emissions in 2008 to what they will be in 2050, it will mean that per vessel, you would have to reduce by 70%.
Yes, that's right.
And this is, of course, not possible by simple optimization and technologies on existing vessels. So I would always like to start the presentation with this by taking a step back and looking at the big picture. And I brought this little prop with me as a thing to explain. So the thing is that the global CO2 levels, they have stayed about 280 ppm, parts per million, in the world for 10,000 years. The past 10,000 years, they've been the same. Actually, they haven't deviated from the 170 to 330 ppm band for the last 1 million years. And now we are suddenly accelerating above 400 ppm. We are living in this small little habitat, which is, limited by the crust of the Earth and the extent of the atmosphere. And if you look at this, this is why I took this globe. The extent of the atmosphere on a scale, if this is the world, is less than 0.5 millimeter, meaning that our habitat is so small. And into this habitat, we have now, since the Industrial Revolution, we take out 20 million tons of coal, 80 million barrels of oil, and 11 billion cubic meters of methane every day. Every day we take this out. Some of this is, of course, becomes industrial products or asphalt, but most of it is burned to CO2. And of course, that it's obvious. This will not go away by just reducing coal. So we have to go for alternative fuels. And in Kongsberg, we are looking at these 3 different things that have to be done. First, we have to reduce the emissions. And there's many things that can be done. There's talks you can, for example, decrease the speed of the vessels, reduce the speed. We have what we call a green DP, meaning a DP system that takes the vessel slowly, but more with less fuel consumption. You can go for smaller vessels. We have an example, a company called Ocean Infinity, who does seismic surveys and similar, and oceanographic surveys. And they are now looking at replacing their big ROV host vessels with smaller unmanned. And of course, if you go from a 60-meter vessel to a 15-meter vessel, you reduce the energy consumption on board. And if it's unmanned, you also remove the whole hotel load that you otherwise would have. So that's the first thing. The second thing you need to do is to optimize the energy conversion on board, meaning that you take all the energy out of the fuel that you're actually producing. So here you have propulsion optimization, hybrid solution, energy management, and so on. That will make sure that whatever energy you put in, you actually put into good use.
Yes.
And then the third one is, like you already mentioned, then we are looking into other fuels, non-fossil fuels. And that's where we have the methanol, the hydrogen, the ammonia, and so on.
Yes.
So this, all this is what we are looking at now. But of course, when you look at the alternative fuels, you have to look at how they will be used. So if you have conventional engines, for example, like you have today, combustion engines, reciprocating engines, you will need something like LNG, LPG to fuel. There is, of course, development going on to eventually be able to run these on ammonia and to run them on methanol, perhaps with some hydrogen injection. And then you can go all the way over to fuel cells. And again, hydrogen, methanol, perhaps.
Yeah.
So this is your prime mover development that has to come into the what you need to focus on.
Okay.
And we are looking into all of this. But the main thing is that, as you said, there's no clear path. So we have to be open-minded at this stage and look at all these different options and see which one is the one that we would prefer.
Yeah.
And but you have to look at also the life cycle of producing these fuels, because if you generate more CO2 emissions in producing methanol or hydrogen, perhaps on your vessel you don't have any emissions, but the emissions are just moved somewhere else.
Yes.
So you have to look at the big picture always in doing all this, and hopefully the fuels would be made by renewable energy. You can create by wind or by solar, even nuclear power you can use to produce direct batteries, or convert it through electrolysis to hydrogen or produce methanol or ammonia. So a lot of technologies, a lot of technical solutions, and
I think with alternative fuels, we have to look a bit further, but say in the next 10 years, even with the technology and the solutions, we can even reduce the CO2 emissions. What are your thoughts, Dr. Sharin?
Yes, definitely. I think within now, in the next decade, there are opportunities. I think we have worked with a lot of ship owners, and we've seen there will always be room for improvement. And our approach, we also take a 3-step approach on that. Is number one is then that now is to be clear also on what are the ambitions, and then understanding their baseline, look at the opportunities, and then focus on the quick wins. So some of the quick wins actually, like I think Henrik may refer to that, is then that looking at how the organization is being managed, right? Looking at performance management, looking at KPI. That itself will not require you to invest anything technical, but yet you could save, at least few percent in terms of reducing your CO2.
Yeah. Okay. If I have a question that came in actually, and that's very much into alternative fuels. The question is, hi, as a fuel cell supplier, I wonder what are your thoughts around fuel cell and hydrogen? Dr. Sharin?
Yep, I guess indeed this is something that we are aware that several companies and consortium are looking at. Of course, the fuel cell, one of the concern would be in terms of the space, right? And of course, then in terms of the other part is the energy source. So if the future development of fuel cell such then that you could generate sufficient energy within the space constraint on board the ship, then it's easier to see what type of energy source that may require to work those fuel cells to generate as an alternative.
Yes,
because it was referred to fuel cells and hydrogen. And we believe the hydrogen and fuel cells could be suitable when you have short distances, because then you can use pressurized hydrogen.
Yes,
if you need to go to cryogenic hydrogen, it's a very different technology.
Okay.
And this is the same with all alternative fuels. You need to look at what is the distances and what sort of vessels are you looking at. So fuel cells, batteries, or fuel cell with hydrogen batteries are probably more suitable for short distances. Say in Singapore, you could typically take the Batam ferries. That could be a good example. But if you're going to go on the high seas, then the options would be maybe perhaps ammonia, methanol. On the other hand, if you're on a cruise ship, you probably may not want to have ammonia on board. It's highly toxic. So there are many considerations.
Yes. No, I think, hearing from both of you speak, my takeaway from a ship owner's point of view is that there won't be much investment required and in this decarbonization journey. And there are many areas that we can do to reduce CO2 emissions even before clear pathways. And this clear pathways requires a lot of investments in it. So if I recall correctly, in the last session of MBAS, the CEO of Ochvel said that maritime has been in a continuous crisis for the last decade. So we are in a very fragmented industry with high costs and low returns. How do we as an industry fund this? So as we go on this journey, will we see an increasing divide between the bigger companies and SMEs, with majority of the SMEs being squeezed out? And how would the Poseidon principles work in practical terms? Does it mean that if the company does not comply with the green KPIs, financing will be withdrawn? Many questions. I'm going to direct it at Eric. Yeah.
That's there's many things to look at. I would say that regulation is an important driver of this decarbonization for the shipping side, especially because there hasn't been traditionally any economic drivers to decarbonize your ships. It's expensive, really. So regulation is important, and that has been impacting the finance side quite significantly. And these days, living in sort of this international world, things tend to be very contagious across borders, as we've seen, especially in 2020. But as it goes for diseases, it also goes for regulation. So regulation is extremely contagious across borders and also across industries as it happens. So I would say, the regulation that you've seen being driven out of IMO, obviously as a global organization, but also what you're seeing in the EU with the CO2 tax, the new taxonomy that is being implemented in 2022. These are things that are having a big impact on the financing. And are leading banks and other sources of financing to move more towards, cleaner ships and cleaner technologies. On top of regulation, you have other drivers such as just risk and good commercial sense. I mean, I think banks these days would be much more concerned about the value of a ship 20 years from now with potentially, completely obsolete propulsion system than what they would have been, 5 or 10 years ago. So it just makes sense for them to be more concerned about that. And then you have stakeholders driving it as well. I mean, there is just a general push towards, greener and more ESG-friendly companies and financing. And the banks are feeling that. The fund managers are feeling that. And this is, this has been going on for a few years. I mean, I don't recall when the Poseidon Principles was first mentioned, but I maybe heard about it the first time a couple of years ago or something like that. So it's been going kind of nice and steady. But, if you look at what's happened the past months, the past 12 months or so, and maybe even more so the past 6 months or so, it's just been a complete paradigm change in terms of how capital is being allocated. So these days, boards are being, pummeled by their shareholders, and they're in turn going after their, internal management to focus on improving the quality of their asset base. And with the taxonomy in the EU, you're going to be forced to basically, report how many of your loans are green, how many of your assets under management is in green financing, etc. And this has a massive effect. So on top of regulation, that's a commercial driver. And the good thing about commercial drivers is that they move quickly, which is what we've seen this year. So I think that will accelerate, the trends that we have been seeing. And, to your question about smaller and larger ship owners, I mean, the past 10 years, as Lauren said, they've been difficult, right? It's a bit of an understatement. It's been really tough out there. And one of the things that's made it even worse for smaller ship owners is that the banks and sources of capital have kind of been migrating towards the larger companies. So you've had sort of the haves and the have-nots in a way. And I think this is just exacerbating that even more because, the requirements that are being put on ship owners, it's not just about buying cheap and selling high anymore. I mean, we've seen, I think, Dr. Shine, you mentioned people testing out like 30 different ways to reduce their fuel consumption. That's not easy to test out 30 different things if you're a small ship owner with, 3 assets. So this is a big ship owner's game. In many ways, maybe the smallest ship owners are the ones that will do okay because they tend to have, older ships, niche trades, and can kind of just focus on that. They don't have to be the technology leader. And then you have the guys in the middle that are probably maybe being squeezed the most because they are still dependent on financing. They are still dependent on trying to kind of get into that tier 1 segment, but the barriers are just being raised every day now.
Yes, yes. So do you feel that from what you say that with the Poseidon principles being more accepted and more practiced, will use, and with what you say on the where the ship owners are, the smaller ship owners will find it difficult to have, for example, ESG reporting, as you said earlier, and they will have difficulty to fund the different scenarios to do the investments. Do you think that there will be no place for them 10 years from now? Your thoughts?
No, I think there will always be a place, and another thing to keep in mind is that the world fleet today is worth something like $1 trillion or something like that. It's big. It's smaller than Amazon, but it's still big. And that is a lot of infrastructure that we have already invested in. The carbon footprint of all of us going, to Kongsberg, ordering new equipment, is not necessarily all the way up there either, right? So we need to kind of try to chew gum and walk at the same time. And so a lot of these smaller owners, they really have a place. These assets need to be utilized, and you don't want to be scrapping a bunch of 10-year-old ships.
Yes.
And so there will be niche trades, like I said, there will be definitely room for smaller owners. All I'm saying is that the barriers have gone up. It's a bit more challenging. Maybe the return on investment won't be as great. But then, of course, the flip side is people aren't ordering as many ships as they used to, which has been the biggest problem we've had. So, there's definitely a silver lining here as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think the maritime industry is always known to be very resilient, very optimistic. We always find the silver lining. Henrik, do you have any thoughts on this?
I was thinking because, as you say, we have the existing fleet, which we have to accept that is there.
Yeah.
And then if I think we realize that going into new technologies will require a combination of carrot and whip in terms of regulations that force ship owners to do certain measures. And then there will be a carrot, which will be that clients will actually prefer a carrier who has a green profile. And then you have the whole ESG discussion, as you mentioned. And there was a report referred to by Michael Parker from Citi. He was the chairman of logistics and shipping in Citi. And they had concluded that the price increase of a pair of jogging shoes was between 0.5% and 1% if it was from a carbon emission-free transport.
Yeah.
So the minute or if all consumers suddenly would demand that the products they are buying would come from emission-free transport, the price increase wouldn't be that great, really.
No.
But again, that would be then applicable to new vessels and not to old vessels.
Yeah.
And in order for all this new technology to be available, say alternative fuels, we also have to realize that there's a whole lot of infrastructure that needs to come in place. So the ship owners today, they don't operate oil wells or refineries. And similarly, we cannot expect ship owners to suddenly make the infrastructure to supply ammonia or methanol or electricity around the world.
Yeah.
So there are other players have to come into the picture, and not only the ship industry.
I agree, and maybe I would just because I hear a few times regulation, but I think the important thing here is ecosystem play, right? I think the different players, I mean, just sitting around here in this panel actually has contributed the various views. And I think that, an ecosystem play where the regulation comes in to provide certain facilities and trials, like Dr. Shireen said, right? You can test 30 paths and 30 scenarios, but you don't want every company to test the 30 scenarios.
That's right.
why not, we do that trial so that people can do this trial and then learn from it, because this is not something that you're going to gain it and make it your competitive advantage, I think. And I think the customers are really demanding for such green technology. So where the regulation or regulator can play a role, we see, is a few areas. One is, of course, at the IMO level, how we do the alignment and get some of these messages down. At the port authority level, because ships goes around to different ports, we can't just say, oh, this is Singapore standards or practice. It has to be a concerted effort, which is why we kind of do a future fuel network among the ports authority, just to discuss that, hey, what kind of future fuel we'll be testing. If you are testing this fuel, I'm testing this fuel, let's do a trial and see how the route will be like, because that is then everyone to gain in terms of the knowledge. Then from the industry side, we also supported the industry and international advisory panel, formed really by industry leaders. Right? So of course, the one that we set up is headed by Mr. Sowen Pao and Mr. Wong Wing-san. So they kind of get together the industries together, both local and overseas, to give a kind of an industry perspective so that the regulators can hear what really works and what really needs to be put in place. So you got the port authority on one hand, the industry's guidance on the other hand, and then, as Soren said, the trials of the various technologies, fuels. This is where I think in each areas we put in place the R&D capabilities, whether in researchers, whether in startups. These are areas and technology partners to test out, because I think it's important during this, as Caroline mentioned, in the next 10 years, what can we really do? I think in the next few years, what we should really do is to really take some of this guidance and test it out, what works and what doesn't work. What kind of ship what kind of vessels will be more suited for what kind of fuel, as you say, the capacity, the energy density, the long haul, short haul, which is why we do a hovercraft call for proposal as well, to see whether we can do electrification, whether we can try different fuel, biofuel. So those are things that we need to try. But importantly is that after we try, we must share, because this sharing of knowledge will give assurance to the SMEs, or give assurance to the financier as well. Because I was talking to some financial institution to say, we have a green future fund. Right? We set up a green future fund, which is both putting in public money as well as private money. But what we lack is the financing part, right? Because we can test out technologies, research, but when it comes to commercialization, we need financing instrument. So we say, why don't you come, join the fund? And the response that I got is, but I'm not too sure whether the technology is ready to scale. So, there needs to bring in the financier at the early stage to go through this process as well, so that together we kind of learn that, so this is the way it works, this is how it's the cost component, and some of the business model that needs to be changed, such as battery could be leased instead of capex, can be an opex item. So those are things that I think is important to put in place. And so we see ourselves not so much just putting the rules and the policies. We see ourselves to try to kind of work together with everybody to see that this is a journey that is worth going on together, because the customers of the shipping industry actually is demanding it, right? So therefore, we need to work together to get this done.
No, the MPA, perhaps Dr. Sharon, you have something to say. Yeah.
Indeed, there's two aspects, I guess, I want to share based on what Eric mentioned. I think one thing you mentioned about the end consumer, right, could be more demanding, right? And that is the reason why I mentioned about our third distinct, call it a pathway as part of scenario, is decarbonization by 2040. This is when, I say other stakeholders are really putting pressure on IMO to be a lot more ambitious. And like what you discussed, it's possible if end consumers are putting, the expectation to whatever they're buying, and that the whole value chain would expected to accelerate in terms of adopting carbon neutral fuel. Right? Then the other aspect, just to add what Kenneth mentioned about sharing and about whether you are at the small medium enterprise type of shipping or in between the sandwich type, is in our view is to find the right partner, right? Because partner that can bring knowledge, partner can that could facilitate the collaboration, bring in the discussion, and this is something that as DMVGL, of course, you are aware then that we do a lot of joint industry projects. Because we believe then that by bringing the different stakeholders together, indeed, like what Kenneth said, getting everyone to put in their thoughts and their ideas, but also then doing pilot project and then working out what it means to bring to the next step, right? So, for example, LNG bunkering in Singapore, we started the first joint industry project was 10 years ago, 2010, and now 2020 we hope to come to reality, right? So it takes 10 years for us, right, to bring the industry together, and then now it comes to reality. So likewise, I think you all may be aware, we're now looking at testing, for example, hydrogen, like indeed for short sea. So we don't do it alone. We bring in partners together, and definitely my team is working a lot with Kenneth's team to really bringing in other industry stakeholders, because where I see probably in Singapore could be different compared to Norway is then that in Norway we see a lot more bottoms-up industry-led type of a collaboration, right? Of course, the government will give, let's say, a big pot of money to say that this is the R&D funding. But then they expect the industry to come together and then to put together the plan, and then to apply for the funding. And that's how they fund for hydrogen, they fund for previously battery, and now also for autonomous shipping. It's because the industry is coming together and applying for that fund, and to show them that yes, as industry, we could work together and come out with a new technology. So I see then that MPA is doing a fantastic job with this call for proposal. Where they set the 3 focus areas that you want to build. But what we also could do is to, for my advice to the SMB, find the right partners and work, with partners that are willing to collaborate and come out something that, could then accelerate the whole process beyond just, something that what the government or the MPA put together, but look at other areas that they can collaborate.
Yeah. If I may just add on quickly, is what we call mission centric. Because typically you will do an R&D project, and then after that you have a study, and then you find the report, and then you publish, and that's it, right? And then it waits for someone else to translate the R&D into a technology. So in this call for the Hovercraft, what we do was mission-centric. We say that the consortium need to actually stream from R&D to tech deployment to trial, and to give us, a glimpse of the business model. So we say that within this span of period of time, try to push and catalyze and accelerate such that it can be commercialized. Because as they do the projects and develop the capability, then we can bring financial. Look, these are the progress. What do you think about the technology? Do you see a second market for such a batteries or something, charging station? And the financier will feel a bit more comfortable. Say, all right, by the time this go to a trial, maybe now I can start to formulate packages. To say that after the trial, maybe if it's successful, I will now start to have a package for some of this. Right? I don't know whether that will kind of works for you.
Yeah, no, it works for me. I mean, the thing is, I'm probably more risk averse than most investors these days, because if you look at the investors, and again, back to kind of what's happened the past kind of 6 to 12 months. I mean, you take this summer, they IPO'd a company called Nikola. Nikola is developing, electric trucks, fuel cell driven trucks. They haven't sold a single truck and delivered it. They have no revenue. The one truck that they did have and demonstrate, it turned out it was rolling downhill. And the reason why I say this is just because this tells you something about, this IPO that I don't know how many billions of dollars that investors were willing to value this at, and they know may not work, but they're willing to place these bets now which they wouldn't have been willing to do 2 years ago. So I think, and we've seen it ourselves, we've IPO'd quite a few companies this year. One company which was entirely focused on, producing hydrogen factories at a scale that's never been produced before. You don't really know if it's going to work. And, the book was 5 times oversubscribed. Everyone wanted it. So, the capital markets will be able to accelerate this going forward. I think things that took 10 years are now going to take 3 years. I mean, it's just really having an effect. And I think the investor that you spoke to, assuming it was more than 6 months ago, you should call him again, and he's going to invest. I'm pretty sure.
In fact, then this is, as you know, it's like this panel. If you have a trials, then we can identify the different trials for different fuel. Even though our port waters are busy with all the ships, but we will always make space and make sure that we bring in all the right partners to test out the different fuels and then the technologies, as well as the ship owners and the hovercraft community, the bunkering community, because I think that's, you need the whole value chain to be ready. And so if you say tomorrow is ammonia, and all right, ammonia for certain type of vessel is good, but do you have the supply, and that's where the bunkering will have to come in. And if you can test that out, I think then concretely, at least we can say this pathway, we have progressed to this, and this for this fuel, we progress to that. And if some other ports are already testing some other fuel, we can learn from them and then, kind of customize it for Singapore.
I guess, Kenneth, to complement to that, right? Indeed, what you're doing here is really good. And I guess for DMVGL, right, looking at things from global, we believe it's important to make things more visible, because ship owners don't just operate in Singapore, right? They operate globally. So if ammonia is just available in Singapore, that would not be sufficient. So what we have done, actually the most recent, that we have incorporated information about where are the location of the ammonia terminals into our alternative fuel insight, because we decided to collaborate with Argus Media. Because we already have the information. It was not meant for shipping, it was meant for something else, right? And we already have the alternative fuel insight where we show location where there's LNG bunkering. But we know for the future, LNG itself will not be enough. We need to look at availability of other alternative fuel. So by collaborating now, that they are putting their data into our, map. So now we look at our alternative fuel insight map. You can see the location for possible bunkering, or location that possibly can have green ammonia available and other things. And that is where we feel as DMVGL, we need to create this visibility and transparency. Then it makes it easier for the ship owners to decide, right? Like what you say, it's just not about what's on board the ship, but what is important is the entire value chain. That if fuel are available at the different ports, that's how LNG bunkering now become viable, become, call it mainstream, because all different places in different continents, there's a possibility for you to do LNG bunkering. So we need to do the same thing for other carbon neutral fuel, right? And to do that, that is where as DMVGL we do our part to make the information to be as as visible as possible, so then the ship owners can make that informed decision on what options they want to consider.
Very good. Yeah.
And if I may,
yes, please.
We are a technology provider, a solution provider. So we don't build ships, and we don't make batteries or fuel cells, but we need to be aware of all these developments and technologies and work together, as you mentioned, with others in order to be. Singapore is a very good example. You have a very, very active maritime environment and put a lot of effort into research. And we are a global company, but still we also have we have limited resources. So we cannot be involved in all initiatives all over the world. And of course, traditionally, being a Norwegian company, our main sort of ambitions and development is taking place in the Nordics, this way. But we are very much present in Singapore as well, including into your hovercraft electrification initiative. So we will always be there where technology takes the maritime industry forward.
Great, great. Yeah, I think there should be some kind of a living lab across to, and there's definitely a lot to learn from Norway. Singapore, being given that it's IMC transshipment hub, there's vessels, so there is also opportunities for trial. So if you see that the living labs across the different regions, as Shamin say, where fuels are there, we can then put together the report, and maybe value add to kind of your report as well in DMV to showcase as the years goes by, concrete evidence that these trials of this fuel meet with such challenges. Then people will think about how to overcome them. But some maybe are smoother, let's say like biofuel, is it the engine, is it going to have performance issue or not? Then we can actually bring in also the researchers, really. And besides the fuel, really, there's also one more point, which is the digitalization part, which is it's not necessary to be all just fuel. It can be all the startup that actually from building management, how they save, you know, the Gencos, how do they do the energy management and convert, you know, how this technology can also complement the fuel partner. So I think it's kind of like a solution that requires different layers. But of course, definitely the whole cash flow thing and the research part needs to gel.
Yeah, it does need to gel. I mean, Dr. Sharon said about this big pot of money in Norway and ground up initiatives where everyone applies for the fund. Whereas in Singapore, I wouldn't say the modus operandi, but it's a little bit different in a sense where it is very much driven by the government. And that's how where you collaborate with all the different parties, right? Yeah. So I have a few questions that came in. Can I ask, one question says, even using alternative fuel, we will have problem with particulate matter and black carbon. And the only solution for this is to use scrubbers. Any thoughts?
Of course, if we just look at the carbon fossil fuel, for example, LNG, right, that would have significantly reduced the PM, particulate matters. So then when you look at other carbon neutral fuel, you know, whether hydrogen or ammonia, then that should not be an issue in terms of the PM or the black carbon.
Yeah, no, I agree. So and of course, in a combustion engine, if you burn biodiesel or other, say, heavy hydrocarbons, this is a possibility. One of the challenges, though, with for example, ammonia is NOx emissions. So you cannot just look at one component and say, okay, we reduce the CO2 emissions, but we generate a lot of NOx. But there's available technologies to handle that. Okay. But there's this is really my thing, that you need to look at the big picture of everything.
Life cycle.
You mentioned the biofuels, say biodiesels, and it sounds very good, but if the biodiesel comes from somebody cutting down the rainforest in Borneo or Sumatra, is it really sustainable? And replacing it with palm oil plantations or palm trees? You know, you have to look at the big picture every time, the life cycle of the fuel you're using and the energy solution.
Yeah, I agree. Just to add, at least for this 2020 report for maritime forecast, we have categorized, for example, ammonia, green ammonia, blue ammonia, likewise, you know, methanol and others, to indeed to reflect, right, what is the source of this the energy, whether it's from renewable or from other source that may be affected. So that's something that we have incorporated as part of this energy transition outlook. You need to look at the totality from, you know, you build this in terms of the source until then, you know, you look at it from the tank to where.
Yeah, Caroline, the question, I think is also, I read it as that the scrubber itself, not really physically refer to the scrubber, but the technology involved in that scrubber to remove salts, NOx. You know, I mean, those are some of the technology that I know that they are trying to do this. And then the removing of that black carbon, is it an additional technology that you can leverage on what you already have built on the scrubber technology, and then you build to see if you can remove some of this? Might be the area of technology development or research, because I know that Norway has done quite a lot also in the carbon capturing technology, right? And in what form it is manifested in? Is it through a scrubber or is it through some other chimney type of a mechanism?
Yeah, the carbon capture projects that have been ongoing and are ongoing in Norway, they are based on catching or absorbing carbon from power plants or from in the newest initiative now, from a cement factory and from a what do you call it, a plant that receives all the garbage. Incineration plant, exactly. And all of those are based, the current technologies that is commercially available is based on the scrubber amine absorption technology. it's kind of sensitive because if you get particular matters and things like this, it's a closed system. So you will get secondary problems with foaming and so on. So you need to filter all that out. You will capture it. You will capture the particulate matter, but you just put it somewhere else and then you need to handle it elsewhere. So yeah.
If I could just, I mean, of course, there's decarbonization and then there's profitability, or the themes we're touching on today, right? So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of focus on decarbonization and we're all for that. At the same time, if you're thinking about profitability, and I mean, especially if you're not sort of one of the large shipping players, then, you know, there's also something to be said for just not doing that much, kind of sitting back and watching and learning and making sure that you are on top of what's going on and kind of where things are headed. But maybe you're not the one who should be doing the heavy lifting, because shipping is, after all, a very small industry. And there are some very small players within shipping. Even the largest shipping players, you know, if you put $50 million or whatever to work, it's a drop in the ocean. And most of these technologies are, you know, large global scale industrial technologies, whether it's the production of these fuels or the fuel cell technology itself. It's being created, you know, for onshore large scale use as well as for the shipping industry. And the shipping industry is, especially considering the past 10 years, maybe not in the best position to lift all of this. So again, I think, you know, if I were a small player and I was thinking of profitability, I probably wouldn't be the one to go out and buy, you know, a ship for $100 million, which could end up being like the mini disc of shipping, sort of gone in 2 years, and then everyone has an iPod. So, you know, watch the space. And I think having a 15-year-old ship today, I mean, God, that could be a fantastic investment over the next few years if people aren't ordering as much, you know, and risk-wise compared to ordering a new build, you know, it's nothing. So not everyone needs to do this lifting.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think shipping will need to follow the lead of the other industries who are coming up with the new ideas and who are doing the R&D. So very good advice actually for some of the companies, that not to worry, just be on top of things, not to be overwhelmed, and let's see where the trajectory is. I think that's a very good advice, because we were talking just now before the session and with Anita, Her Excellency's speech, where she talks about the carbon levy of $2 per ton and $5 billion. Is that even sufficient for what the ambitions that we have? Your thoughts, anyone?
I guess I think we need to start somewhere. I think definitely something also then that I think the industry could, you know, manage in terms of the cost, right? Though Eric, I guess I have a different view to you in terms of for some of the ship owners to just take a back seat. I think the least they should do is maybe to work or to have the right partner, because if you just trying to look from the surface, then your organization may not have ability then to adjust when the time needs, right? That will always be the case, you know, when you need to consider fleet renewal, you know. So the question is then that when and what and how, right? So then if you just decide to be on the sideline, probably then, you know, when it's time for you to do fleet renewal, you know, it could be too late, because as you know, others would have, you know, done their homework much earlier. So I think that there is really need a balance between totally on the sideline versus at least to be, you know, having the strategy to work with the right partners, and then to build that knowledge over time, because the whole organization needs to be ready for it eventually, right? And then, you know, decide, you know, again, let's say when you need to go for, let's say, fleet renewal, then decide what would be the best option so then that you can future-proof your asset.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I mean, if you're BW Group, if you're Eastern Pacific, if you're Maersk, if you're one of these guys, I definitely, you know, you're doing that. You know, you're investing in some different technologies. It's not because you're expecting to drive, you know, the future, but you want to make sure that you're on top of it, and you get the reports on what's happening, and you're ahead of the curve. And you need to be if you're one of those players. But I really feel that, you know, if I were, you know, a smaller shipping company with, you know, 4 15-year-old tankers, I don't think that I would feel like I will spend my spare capital to invest in a new type of, you know, fuel technology for shipping. I just think that it's not going to really move the needle, and you don't need to be that far ahead of the curve as a small player.
Yeah, I agree. What I'm referring to that it's not a question of investment, but it's a question of how active you like to be part of that knowledge development. So our recommendation is actually for the small players, work with others to, let's say, join the RC project. You do not need to put in money, in some of this project, just need to participate, so then that you are part of that learning process. And our view, at least the work that we've done with MPA on the additive manufacturing, right? Reading the report versus going through the whole process of building the report is two different things. That being part of the joint RC project, it allows you to learn with the others, and then you would have 6 to 12 months ahead compared to someone who is not part of this project.
I felt a lot smarter after reading your report.
So I would really recommend, again, maybe I differ from you, is then that don't just take a backseat, stay on the sideline, but being involved without the need to put in the investment yet until the organization is ready. So we in the NVGL here, we do a lot of joint RC project, and we do encourage, to work with partners. So that's what we believe, as how we could help the Singapore ecosystem, right? Rather than just producing the report and presenting it, but working together so that we all can learn together.
I hope so.
Maybe I'll just add on to Sharin's point. It's really is the knowledge and the people, because I think we talk about the decarb, we can talk about profitability, but also the manpower, the skills and knowledge, right? Because
and I think the one thing that's really changed lately is the acceptance that this is an issue.
Yes.
If you go, and there's still, of course, people in the world, influential people, still influential for a couple of months, who don't believe in that this is a problem. But most people do. And that is the first very important step.
And I was just adding that because the people, even in the small firm, if they get to understand the projects, then they maybe not so much invest, but give their inputs, right? Because they will say that, well, if you want to try this, and I'm just thinking aloud, if you apply on my ship, on my vessels, this is the constraint that I will face. How would you solve it? I think that knowledge building
process
itself is become important, so that when they face with a decision at some point to whether follow, because as we say, the pathway could be a few, they need to now know which one is best suited for their context and their operation parameters, their inputs and all that, and that will become valuable.
Yeah.
Okay, so on that note, I think we are almost up our time, but just to summarize, I think what I'm hearing is really that all the stakeholders must be involved. The regulators have to be strongly, has to take a bigger role in this decarbonization journey, and all these stakeholders like the charterers, the ship owners, the engine makers, end to end. And that's where then we can have our successful decarbonization journey, which is not an option. It is, we have to do it. Yeah. So it then leaves me to thank my panelists. Thank you, gentlemen. It has been a privilege to have you.
Thank you.
And I also would once again want to thank the sponsors, DNVGL, Norwegian Embassy, Embus and Flock. And there is actually quite an insightful podcast on decarbonization with Christina of DNVGL and Eric here of Perito Securities. Please check Embus website to access this podcast. And thank you everyone for watching this session. I hope you found it as interesting as I have. Thank you and good day.